Hello and welcome to this lab on render passes and compositing. So firstly, what are render passes? Well, render passes let us take elements of our render and render them out as separate images. This is extremely useful for when we might want to make changes to a render after we've rendered it. These might be small little changes. We might want to change the color of an object. We might want to make something brighter or less shiny. If we just have one final render, that can be really difficult to do in Photoshop or After Effects or something. But if we have something like specular highlights as a separate image, we can turn that down really easily. We can isolate things real easier. So we have a number of render passes we can use to alter images after rendering without having to re-render. So it's really effective and used often in studios, especially VFX. It can be really expensive to re-render things, so if you can do more after something is rendered, then that's a lot better. I'm going to talk about a few render passes that we're going to use. One of them is beauty. Beauty, it just know, is basically what you get when you press render. That's everything all together in one image. So most of the time you can end up just using a beauty pass. If no changes are needed, then you can just use it. But if things are needed to be changed, then you might need the other ones to work with. Object ID, this is a pass where elements are rendered as flat solid colors. This means in something like Photoshop, we can really easily just select one object and then we can mask it and then do alterations just on that object. Diffuse is one we'll use. It's good to work as a base. It's basically the direct lighting on the textures without any shininess. Indirect, sometimes referred to as global illumination in other ones. This is just light bouncing off of all the other surfaces and when it hits a surface. So you can see in this example, the diffuse has the direct light coming in from the windows there, but the indirect doesn't have that because that's a direct light. It has the illumination of all the surfaces bouncing around the room. Specular is our specular highlights. You can't really see in this example, but over down here you can see on the marble that there's the specular highlights. Coat is kind of like specular highlights, but it only shows the coat parameter of a material. So that could be something like a polished floor, which you can kind of see here. Alpha is just the cutout of where the transparency is. So on this one, you can see where the windows are because that's the transparent area. Depth is a really useful one. We're going to use that to do a post depth of field effect. Depth is very useful and often used in VFX. Ambient occlusion occurs when two objects get close to each other, two pieces of geometry get close to each other, and where light would struggle to hit. It's an effect that occurs in real life all over the place, so it's often, renderers often include it. Arnold does it by standard. We're not really going to use this to rebuild anything, but it's a good one to know, so I'm going to show you how to make it. So if you open up your render pass start 3ds Max file, I'm just going to show you how to set up these passes. In rendering, we go to render setup, or F10. Then over here we have AOVs, and Arnold calls the render passes AOVs, which means arbitrary output variable. If you click on AOVs, we get an option to add them. We're going to use TIFFs for ours at the moment. EXRs are really useful because you can actually pack each separate layer into one EXR. That's really useful when you start doing things like animation and whatnot, but for the moment we're going to use TIFFs. Except for our depth, we're going to use an EXR just because it needs more information. But if you select TIFF, now let's add AOV file, then you get the options down here. We're always going to be using the built-in ones, so if you open built-in. Now the first one we're going to add is diffuse. So if you just scroll down, find diffuse, okay, and then once you've clicked on it, you just click add. Alright, so now that we've got our diffuse in our list here, and everything is set up fine there. So then we're going to add another one, built-in. This time we'll do the indirect. So just scroll down, find indirect, click add. Okay, and we'll keep going through. So let's add another one. This one we're going to add the specular. So just scroll down to specular. Just specular there. Add. Okay. Now we'll add the transmission. Transmission is going to show us where our glass is. So let's click transmission, and it will work for these lampshades because we use some transmission on there. Okay, we're going to add one called albedo, and we'll talk about that later, but if you click the albedo there. Now we're going to add depth. So this one we're going to make an EXR. So if you go to this drop down here, choose EXR. EXR has a lot more information in it that we need for the depth pass because the depth pass stores pixels with a big bit rate, so we need EXR. And then scroll down way to the bottom and you'll see Z. That's for Z depth. So let's add that. So this one's now in EXR, that's good. We'll change it back to TIFF. Now we're going to have to make some custom ones to do the object ID and ambient occlusion, because we need to make materials for them that are going to override the materials that it can render out. So if you press M to bring up your material editor, now up here, if you type AOV, we get this AOV right to RGBA. What this lets us do is override all the materials in our scene to do a render pass, a custom render pass. We also need to pump in a standard surface into it. So we also need to put in a standard surface. And this needs to go into the pass through. Now AOV input is going to be the important one. So if we go up here, type ambient, we get this ambient occlusion. Now pump that into the AOV input. Now in here, in this one, we need to give it a name. So I'm going to say ambient underscore occlusion. Okay, now the main thing to do is we need to add the custom file. So in custom, well, we don't need to open up custom yet. We need to enter custom name here. So it needs to be this one. If you put that in there, click add to list, then it'll be in a list. You'll only have one here. Ignore these other ones. These are just other ones I've done in the past. So this one, and I'm going to click add. And the other thing we need to do, if you click into here, we need to put this material in there. And that's going to use it. This is going to be one of our custom shaders. Now we need to do the similar thing for our object ID pass. It's a similar process, so I'm just going to be lazy, highlight these, hold shift and drag down. And this one, we're not going to call it ambient occlusion, we're going to call it object underscore ID. Kind of spaces, so make sure you use underscore. And I'm going to take away this ambient occlusion, and instead I'm going to type utility, and we're going to use a utility map. And what this lets us do is a few cool things, but we can change the color mode to something of our choice, and our color mode is going to be object. So down here, OBJ, and what that's going to do is it's going to assign a random color to each object in the scene. So make sure you pump it into AOV, and the shade mode we want to be flat. So it's going to be a flat color, flat random color for each object in our scene. Now we've got a custom name here, so we go add AOV file, and the custom name is going to be the same. So object ID, add to list, you'll get it there. So click it, click add, and then here, if you click this bit, we'll get our shaders back up. We want to put that shader in here as well. So an instance. So these are our custom shaders. So one last thing we need to do, if I just show you an example render here, render quickly, is if I click here, display alpha channel, you see that it's all white. We don't want that. We want the windows to have an alpha channel so that we can see through them. There's a few things you need to do to set that up in Arnold. Firstly, if we select the glass that we want to be see-through, so I have the glass as separate objects in this, so I'm just going to select each glass object. Make sure I have them here. Yep, glass, 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 glass. Now I can go over to here, and what I'll need to do is add Arnold properties modifier onto it. So if I put that on top and open up general properties, then down here we have general, and what I need to do is untick opaque. That'll let us change it so it will go see-through. And the other thing I need to do, if I press M, bring up material browser, and find the glass material that I'm using, it has to be a standard surface for this. If I scroll down, obviously the transmission is 1, so it's see-through. But what we also need to do is there's a special features, an opacity cutout. We need to change that for it to become see-through. So completely black is completely see-through, but we don't want completely black, so we want to see some specular highlights and whatnot on it. So I'm just going to make it somewhere about there. Click OK, and that should be it. Now if I render again, just quickly as a test, and then hit display alpha channel, you can see we've got an alpha channel now. So I can even save that on its own. I could save this after the fact and make sure that I've got an alpha channel. So that's one other thing to bear in mind. For this example, I turned off the environment map. Just so you know how to do that, in Arnold Renderer, in the render settings, down here, down here, you have your environment background. If you click here and open up advanced and scroll down, you get scene environment, and you've got visible to camera rays and visible to specular reflections turned on by default, I think. You can turn off camera rays and then it won't show when you render. So you see there, it doesn't show, but you still have your alpha channel that you can work with and whatnot. That's if you don't want to render it with your beauty pass. We can still have it separated out, so it's not too much of a problem, but just know that you can untick there if you don't want it to be seen. If it is ticked, it will render with the environment background, but we've still got our alpha channels, so it's all good. Now, what I like to do is do a test render first to make sure all of our passes are working, and I usually do that as something small. So if you go to your common settings, if you just change it down to the smallest resolution. Also in Arnold Renderer, set all of these to 1. If you're doing it in your project and you've already got your settings ready to go, take a note of them, just write them down or take a screenshot. But for this quick test, I'm just going to set everything to 1. And the other main thing to make sure is that you have a render output folder set. So I've just made a test folder, test passes folder, and I'm going to select save. And I'm going to hit render. It'll do it very quickly. Yep, instantly. And then I'm going to go to that folder and make sure all my passes are working. So just looking through here, and it looks like everything is coming through fine. So now I would be okay to do a big render. So I set all my values back up to full, do the full resolution, and at that point I sort of set it and forget it. This bit was just to show you how to set those up. These are the main good ones to use, so use these AOVs. And what I'll do is I'll go render a high quality one and come back and give them in the resources, and we'll talk about how to put them together. Okay, so if you look into the resources folder, you can see the final render with the passes. So this apartment render, ignore this final, that's just an example of it being composited. Apartment render.tiff, if we take that in first. Now, what we're going to do is recreate this by using the passes. So I'm just going to double click here so that it's not locked. I like to keep it on top so we can have a look at things as we're doing them. I'm going to take in first this diffuse. And I'm going to put under this, I'm going to call this beauty. And I'm going to keep it turned off for the moment. But now what we're going to do is add on each pass and rebuild that beauty. So we're started with our diffuse. Now let's put indirect on. So I've got indirect. I'm going to take that in, put that there. And what we want to do is set it to screen. And you can see the difference if I turn it on and off. You can just see where that kind of indirect lighting is helping add to our scene. Now let's add in our specular. I'll drag that in. And again, I'm going to set it to screen. And we can see what that's doing. It's giving all the specular highlights to each point. Next one I'm going to put in is coat. So the coat was kind of the polish on the floor that I used for this material. So if I set that to screen, turn that on and off, you can see the effect. Now I'm going to put in transmission. You can see that's where the lampshades are. Again, I'm going to set this one to screen. Okay, so we've technically got all of the information in here now to make up that beauty pass, but obviously it doesn't look the same, quite the same. So some things we can do, we can change the exposure of each layer here. So in adjustments over here, we've got exposure. I'm going to click it here, and so we get the exposure here, but this will affect all the layers below it unless we click this, which means it will just affect that one. So now I'm controlling the exposure of just the indirect light, and I can just play with that value. So maybe I just want that to be a little bit. The specular, let's do the same. Add an exposure in, and you can see what that does. That's intense. So maybe I want that to be about here. So I'm just showing you the examples of how to rebuild the scene. So let's go to exposure again. Let's do that for the coat. And you can see, you know, this is why this is really useful, because we might decide, oh, I want it to be extra shiny. So I could really kind of turn it up, or maybe I decide I don't want it to be shiny at all, so I could take that all the way down. It's just a lot of flexibility here to rebuild. Well, not rebuild, but just to edit your renders with. Transmissions, again, let's add exposure on. Exposure, make only work the layer below, and I could change the brightness of that lampshades on their own. So you can see this is kind of handy, and then of course the diffuse as well at the bottom. That one will really kind of affect the overall look as well. So you see the flexibility you get here. You get a lot to play around with to kind of get the look of your scene. But most of the time, the beauty pass is actually what you want to use anyway. I still think this beauty pass looks overall better than what I've done there. You don't always need to rebuild a beauty pass, but they are very handy if you do want to change specific things. Now, I'm going to show you now how we could use this object ID. So I'm just going to make all of these one object now, well, one layer. So if I select all of these, I'm not leaving the beauty, and click the folder, I can make it a folder. So let's call this, I don't know, build. I'm going to hold Alt and drag and click so I can make a copy. I'm going to hide one, then I'm going to right click merge group. So now I've got just one layer of what I did in all those folders. And I'm going to take in the object ID, place that in. I'm going to show you the kind of things we can do with this. So if, say, I got my magic wand tool over here, quick selection tool, and click and drag there. You can hold Alt with this one to deselect and just kind of paint a deselection. Just showing you quickly, this isn't really too much of a Photoshop tutorial, but with that selection now, I could go into this layer. I'm just going to make a copy of it. Here I could do layer mask, so that now I've just got that selected, and that was really quick and easy. A lot easier than if I was to try and do it this way. See, I'm selecting a lot of other things, but with just that, it's a lot easier to select. Yep, so if you had the tolerance set to something really low, like 2 or something, it's just going to select each color. So, you know, it gives you a selection just for each object. Really handy. Just to show you that what we could then do with that, if I just hide this, so we've got this one just on its own, then maybe I could decide I wanted to change the color, so I could put hue saturation on, just make it affect that layer below, and I could change the color of it. You know, lots of cool, fun, quick things you can do. And the other thing I want to quickly show you is why an albedo might be useful. So if I take that one in, it's just got our flat textures. So if I took the same mask there, and maybe I could play around with the overlay, and you can kind of see that it just lets me kind of rebuild textures a little bit. Lots of cool, handy things you can do with that. So that's some reasons why you might use that pass. I'm just going to get rid of it for just now. Yeah, that was the main thing to show you, just with this object ID and why it's very useful. Just so you can make good quick selections. Use them as masks so that you can make adjustments just on specific objects. And then I could even turn down specular on just one specific object. You can do a lot of good compositing stuff with these. So if I put that just on there, I could, you know, I can then start changing how one object looks. So don't worry about it doing that too much unless you have something specific that you need glowing or something. It's just get your mind around why you might want to use an object ID pass, but they're super handy. Because we rebuilt our beauty pass, we've got transparency behind here, but you notice on this one, we don't have the transparency from the beauty pass. That's okay if I just take in the alpha. Oops, scale that up a bit. If I took in the alpha, I could just make this a layer mask. So I can go Control A, Control X. Oops, first I have to rasterize it. Control X, and then I clicked and made a layer mask. Alt click to go into it, and pasted it in. But I need to invert it. Control I. So white's where it shows, black where it doesn't. Then you see my beauty pass has alpha background there. But yeah, this is good if you want to put in a custom background. So for example, if I bring in this city, I can put that through the windows. Then I'd probably need to change the exposure of this just so it kind of matches the scene. So you can see you can kind of do effects. And it would probably be a bit blurry outside, so probably just blur it a little bit. Oop. Just as an example there, just to show you. For your coursework, I'd like to see you at least do something in Photoshop to kind of touch up your final images. This one, for example, I've put in a custom background. What I would also do, I like to do a few things. So just before I finish, I put everything in one folder again, and then let's just merge this group. So it's one image. I like to make a copy of that image, then use a lens blur on top, and I set it to something like this. I'm going to show you also how to do a fake depth of field in a sec, but go something like that. Then if you change that to add on top, you get kind of like a nice kind of bloom effect. Actually, maybe screen. So you get kind of a nice bloom effect, and then you can change the levels on that just to isolate it a little. Select the bottom. So you can kind of change the levels on it, which is kind of cool. You get kind of a nice, as I say, a nice bloom effect, so you see the difference with that on and off. That's sometimes nice for some scenes. I'm going to merge them again. Now I'm going to show you how to use the depth pass. So one here we haven't used is this AOVs.exr. That was our depth pass. So I'm going to bring it into Photoshop, but click up here so that it goes into a new workspace. And your depth pass will come out white when you first use it. There's no information here. So what I first have to do is go to adjustments, go to exposure, and then drag it down just so I start seeing some of the things going on here. So I usually get it just about there so I can see what's happening. Now if I go to adjustments, add levels on top. On this levels, I can now see this is where all my information is. So I'm going to bring in this top point to about there, and the bottom point to about there. And then just to make it a little bit easier, I make another one on top just so I can see the exact highlight and dark point. There, I can now see the depth. But one thing to consider is the depth pass won't use transparency. So these windows, we would want not to show the glass. We would want to have it white because the space beyond the windows would be very far away. So white means far away, black means close. What I usually do is I'll take the alpha, put it on top, and set it to add. Then this is now a good depth map. So I'd save it. Now you can see I can't make it a JPEG. That's because I'd have to change the mode first, because this is 32 bits per channel. So if I go image mode, then I can change it back to 8 bits per channel. It doesn't matter if I merge, I'll just merge it, that's fine. Now I get a few options here, it doesn't really matter, just click OK. Then Control-Shift-F to save, and now I get JPEG. I can call it depth, or whatever. Depth. Now, this is a cool thing. If I bring my depth that I just made into here, and what I want to do is first rasterize it, right click rasterize layer, and Control A to select it, Control X to take the selection. Now if I click on this one here, I'm going to make a copy, hold Alt and drag and click. If I click layer mask, then Alt click into the layer mask here, I can paste that in. Now it's using this as a layer mask. And then what I can do is go filter, blur, lens blur. Now, so it's kind of going to take a while. If I click faster, it'll be a little bit faster. But now what I can do is choose the source as layer mask, and I can actually focus on specific parts of the image just using that depth mask. So this is a really nice way to do to kind of change the focus after we've rendered without having to re-render. You can change the focal distance, you can change the radius of the blur, But it's a really nice effect that some of you might find useful. So I'm just going to maybe play around with these values and see what it kind of looks like. So it's just focusing on the door. I click OK. Now you can see the difference on and off. We've got this kind of nice quick depth of field effect. One other thing I like to do, just to kind of touch things up after I've kind of played around with and I'm happy with everything, I'll go filter, camera raw filter, which brings up the camera raw settings so you can get some really kind of nice control over your image. The most things I'll be doing in here is going into detail. This is actually quite a main point. We can get rid of a lot of noise in our images in Photoshop by using Photoshop's noise reduction. So in here in detail, we get noise reduction luminance. We can drag that slider up a little bit and you can notice noise kind of disappear a little. We don't want to go too far with it because then it just gets really blurry, but if we use it in combination with some sharpening, so if I hold Alt, I can see what it's doing. But if I turn this sharpening up and then hold Alt and click on this masking, turn that up to something like that, then the detail I can hold Alt again and see what it's kind of doing. Radius, hold Alt, see what it's doing. But if you use the luminance in combination with the sharpening, you can kind of get rid of a lot of noise, which is really kind of handy. So, but you never want to take it up too high. Just want to kind of touch it up a little. Okay, those are just a few quick things on compositing. Yeah, so for your image, remember, you don't always need to just rebuild your scene. If your beauty pass looks good, start with it. Things to remember when touching up is just to make sure that your image looks good overall. If something's not looking right, try and think about how you might be able to fix it. I'll link some tutorials on some specifics for compositing. Hopefully this will give you a good kind of overall. Play around with it, play around with these passes and see what you can kind of do with it. Okay, yep, that's everything for this one.